All right, friends, it's time to give you loyal listeners a discount on protein powder. You may or may not know, but I launched my very first protein powder 2 years ago. It's a grass-fed beef isolate with only 3 ingredients: grass-fed beef, either organic cacao or organic vanilla, and organic monk fruit. Now, if you don't want any of the added flavor and sweeteners, you can also just get unflavored. And no matter what flavor you choose, you're getting over 23 grams of protein per scoop, which is going to keep you full and satisfied between meals. I love starting my day with a Fab4 smoothie and breaking my fast with that much protein. It makes a serious difference in my cravings and blood sugar balance the rest of the day, and I've seen it with my clients as well. Now, I never thought I'd own a product company, but when I got pregnant with Sebastian, I realized the majority of protein powders were chemically extracted or enzymatically extracted, and I wanted to use heat and water only. I wanted minimal ingredients because we don't need those emulsifiers, fillers, or added vitamins, minerals, and probiotics. All of those additions increase the chances that it's not going to work for your body, whether it be bloating, digestion issues. I just wanted pure, clean protein to keep you full and satisfied so you could build the most delicious Fab4 smoothie. And I have to say, I'm pretty proud of the flavor. If you take a look at our reviews on Amazon, you'll see 5-star reviews for flavor. And that is key, because if you don't love your Fab4 smoothie and you don't love drinking your protein powder, you're not going to do it. It won't become a habit, and it's consistency that outpaces everything. So if you're here and you're listening and you want to give our protein powder a try, use the code podcast5 for $5 off your order. And let me know if you love it. My favorite ways to apply this protein powder is in my Fab4 smoothie, making freezer fudge, making chocolate milk, making hot chocolate, and throwing the unflavored into all my kids' baked goods. So let me know how you use it. Let me know if you love it, and share this podcast deal with your friends. Dr. Aliza Pressman is a developmental psychologist with over 15 years of experience working with families. She holds a BA from Dartmouth College and an MA in Risk, Resilience, and Prevention from the Department of Human Development at Teachers College, and her PhD in Developmental Psychology from Columbia University Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. After co-founding Seedlings Group and the Mount Sinai Parenting Center, she began Raising Good Humans podcast to bring the latest research on child development directly to parents. Without having to sift through journals or endless parenting books, Dr. Aliza is empowering parents with the knowledge they need to make choices for their families. She's bringing her expertise and background to listeners every week and starting a new community around evidence-based parenting practices. It is a pleasure to bring on Dr. Aliza and get all the tips and tricks on parenting toddlers. Dr. Aliza, I am so glad to see you. I'm so glad we've made the connection, that we've been at an event together before, and to be full circle here on the other side, interviewing you, learning all of the tips and tricks on how to be the best mom ever. It's just a joy. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. And I'm sure you are the best mom ever.
Look, I try my hardest. And, I think my parents did a good job when I was little of always saying, like, did you try your best? And I got to answer that for myself. It wasn't meeting a specific bar. So I feel like that's baked into my psyche. And, sometimes my best on a day when I'm super stressed is like frozen foods and being a nutritionist, I'm like, hey, I steamed some broccoli for 8 minutes, and that's a win on the side of whatever
it is.
Yeah, gluten-free nugget or pizza situation there is. So, anyways, I'm really happy to have you, and I'm excited to learn. So before we get started and I start asking selfishly all the questions I have about parenting, can we talk about your background and what you studied and what you do and your amazing podcast, Raising Good Humans?
Thank you. Okay. So my background is, I am a developmental psychologist. So it's a little bit different than a clinical psychologist in that my lens is not to look at psychopathology. It's to look at the way human beings develop from birth through the lifespan. But my focus is on kids, babies and children. And because of that, I work with parents. And even though my focus is on how children come to be who they are and healthy social, emotional, and cognitive outcomes, there's that is so inextricably linked to the parent experience that there is a whole field of study in parenting, then that is what I focused on toward the end of my graduate school career. And I know parenting as a verb is a really funny thing, but it's just, we haven't figured out a better word yet. But I recognize that it's a little bit funny sounding, like we're all doing it, whether we're intentionally doing it or not. And so after graduate school, I started private practice and I still do run mom groups and parent groups and have private clients. And separately, I work at the Mount Sinai Parenting Center and at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York, where I'm on faculty. So I work with training physicians who interact with parents and caregivers, but don't have much training in social emotional development and behavioral stuff. And then the parenting center over there, we create programs to support families who otherwise won't have all those nuggets of social, emotional, behavioral health and relational health. And I think that's it. And I have a podcast.
And you have a podcast, Raising Good Humans, where you interview researchers and other doctors on how we can all parent better.
Yeah.
I love it. So I am a parent. I have young toddlers. There is so much to learn and it can be a little bit overwhelming, but from your lens, what are like the major topics that are important for parents to think about when they're raising children?
Probably the first thing, and I'll say this, I try to give a lens that is translating research. So if I'm saying something, it's not my opinion typically. And then if you want my opinion, I'm happy to give it. But usually if it is my opinion, it's because I'm pulling together the science and trying to make it accessible to families so that it's usable in like real life. Sometimes, and this is the theater geek in me, but I say from page to stage, because sometimes there's lots of research, this in your field, there's tons of information, there's lots of studies, but how does it actually matter in the heat of the moment or in your day-to-day interactions? And the first thing that we know to be true is that coming to terms with how you were parented, your own parenting, and what you want to pull from that and what you want to avoid is really an important part of developing a healthy relationship and secure attachment with your child. And so just being reflective about that and thinking about that and talking to your partner, and if you have a partner, about how you're co-parenting and what your experience was being parented is more important than we realize. Because otherwise there's lots of ghosts in the nursery, they call it. And you don't want that interrupting your relationship. And then after that, it's coming to some kind of agreement with yourself on what your North Star is in parenting. And that's not for me to say because it's so individual. And I know that in the world of social media, and I'm on it and I get it, and it is a really wonderful opportunity to reach lots of parents and caregivers, but it's also problematic in that it can sound really prescriptive, like there's just a one size fits all approach. And that's never true in science. And more likely, especially in this partially social sciences, where it's not just like a math equation, you have to know that what we're talking about is more likely than chance. This is better for your kids. But it's not, if you don't do this, your kids are going to come out horribly. And so sometimes it sounds really big and important to do it, sleep a certain way or interact a certain way. But really it's probably better. And since we know it's probably a little bit better, give it a whirl if it is comfortable for you. It's not more serious than that for the most part. Other than we know that kids who have sensitive, loving caregivers who set clear boundaries and have appropriate limits have kids who do better in pretty much every domain in life. So if we know that to be true, and that's all you need to know, the rest is a lot of gravy or sometimes just noise and nonsense. It doesn't necessarily matter beyond that. But that little thing is a lot because it comes into play in every interaction. So I guess the first thing is coming to terms with your own self and your own relationship with your family and your experience, and then making a decision about what your North Star is. For me, my North Star is kind of all feelings are welcome, all behaviors are not. And that captures in my mind the idea of parenting sensitively and also with boundaries. And the rest truly, truly is about getting to, being curious and getting to know your child and what their needs are and what your needs are as a parent, because so often like martyr mothers make themselves miserable and it's no favor for their kids. So the mistakes that you make or the not perfect meal that you make is a gift to your kid. Because if your parent is perfect, there is an unspoken message that you're supposed to be perfect. And, women especially do not need that message. We already feel that loud and clear.
Yeah. Thank you. The world has already told us that enough.
Yeah. We can just shut that off and we got it.
Yeah. Oh, so much to unpack. But can we start with, can I just hold space and say thank you for your North Star, that all feelings are welcome, but all behaviors are not, because there is that conversation that's happening on Instagram right now, or like in this space where it is making, my parents parented me, I think a lot different than any of my generation is parenting their kids. There's a lot more communication. How are you feeling? Okay, I'm acknowledging how you feel. It's okay to feel how you feel. Here's the boundary around like what you're allowed. My parents were just like, you're not allowed to run in the street. No, right. You're not getting that. And like, they loved me. Like they were those attentive, loving parents, but the boundaries came first. There was no like, everything that you're feeling is cool. It was just like, that's not happening. Moving on.
Yeah.
I feel like I turned out okay, but
I think that that's a really good point. First of all, how you define, and like, I sound so serious right now. I have no idea why. Today is one of those days, but how you define that North Star looks different for everybody. From what you just described of your parents, you knew you were loved and they had clear boundaries. I don't know that that is much different than what I'm talking about. It's just that it is expressed in a different way. An example is that there are a lot of people that think that that kind of sort of sensitive approach to parenting means no yelling. Well, obviously people are going to yell if they're yellers.
Yeah.
The difference is, so I grew up in a household where very different cultural backgrounds. And on one side of the family, the yelling was like saying, pass the broccoli. Like it was just a loud, yelly kind of culture. And the other side, it was not. That meant that in the yelly side of my family, the yelling was not scary. It was not damaging. It was a cultural thing. And so I could feel loved and that could be a sensitive person and sensitive caregiving and sound to an outsider. Like really a lot of yelling was going on. Whereas if on my mom's side, yelling had happened, I would have been like, whoa, this is terrifying, because my mom was just not a yeller, and none of her parents and siblings, they just weren't yellers. So it really matters your unique circumstance. So how you interpret what all feelings are welcome, all behaviors are not, how you interpret that will be different, because you might say you're allowed to be upset about this, but primarily you have to get in the running across the street thing's an extreme example, because I don't think any parent is like, I just want to wait and see how you're feeling. I know you were tempted to run across the street, but you just have to grab them. They can't die.
Yeah.
So
safety first.
Safety first. But after safety first, which is important no matter what generation is talking about parenting, because if you're not there, you can't be parented. Yeah. So safety first, but then emotional safety. And I was emotionally safe in a household that was yelly when it was clear that that was just their sort of way of being. They were loud people. They were immigrants who came from a place that was louder than it was, it was just a different way of being.
Context.
Totally. And so I think we forget that. So I don't know that I do a lot of mindfulness work. I'm definitely not a yeller, but I grew up with yelling and it doesn't really scare me. It's just that the context, if I came home and started to just rant, then my kids would be like, whoa,
What's happening?
I don't know if this feels very safe right now because I'm unfamiliar to them.
Right.
So I think that your parents sounded like they may have been, they were sensitive enough to make sure you felt loved, and the boundaries are more important. If I think today sometimes people get confused with sensitivity, meaning just be permissive. Like,
Right.
I just care about how you're feeling and everything else will just fall into place. And that's never really great for kids either.
It's interesting because I like boundaries, giving my clients boundaries around food, and it's not food rules. And I don't like black and white and never going to eat something again or never going to do something again. But there is some safety that they feel when I'm giving them productive things to do. Just like in parenting, I feel really productive when someone like you is teaching me how to have secure attachment with my children and communicate that. And I don't want people to think that my parents were just like, they were just strict with me. So if in 9th grade, I had a 9 p.m. curfew, in 10th grade, I had a 10 p.m. curfew, 11, you get it. Finally, when I went to college, I think I was able to like come home after the bars closed when I was old enough to go out. But when I look back, it was not like, hey, I know it's really fun for you to go out with your friends and to stay at these parties, but I don't like what happened. I don't think there's anything good happening after 11 p.m. at night at your age.
So
and thus you come home at 11 p.m. I still can understand that could upset you. It was just sort of like, no, your curfew's 11. And then I, as a teenager, would freak out and yell probably.
But you just gave a perfect example of like parenting teenagers. So you probably would have felt a little bit more comfortable with that curfew. The curfew wouldn't change. Like a parent who's giving good boundaries and sensitive is still keeping that same curfew, but they're just saying like, I know it would be really fun. I get it. Here's why we're not making a change in this rule. And you still might push back and be pissed about it. Can I say pissed?
You can. Yeah. People have said worse. We won't bleep out the pissed. It's okay.
But that's a great example. And that translates in with your 3-year-old and it translates with a teenager.
Yeah. And I think that, I mean, it is interesting. It probably would have diffused my anger a little bit. I still would have been mad, but, and I still, hard-headed probably would have continued to fight back on those curfews. But at the end of the day, it was what it was. And that's how my parents parented me. But it's just interesting because I do think some of the rules that my parents had, even like around like television, screen time with me as a kid, like we really I had some pretty strong rules with that too. Like it was more the weekends and things like that, where I was like waiting for TGIF to be on. And, I had these moments of like, yes, Full House, Will Smith, or like whatever it was, like, the shows that were on then, I like just had to wait for them. But anyways, I want to circle back so people get some takeaways from this, but it's just interesting because there is so much of our past that we're like, well, I think it was a good, like some of the things that my parents did, I'm like, wow, that was really awesome. Like I didn't miss the television time. I did get to get creative. I did do more art. I did play outside longer. Like I wasn't attached to a screen, and I have amazing memories of that. And so I want my kids to have that. Obviously today's day and age has changed a lot. There weren't even little like smartphones back then, I mean, I think I remember my parents having a car phone that would get excessively hot and like an old car, and be plugged into like a cigarette lighter. Right. Yeah. But people are probably like, what? And I'm like, yes, I also listen to CDs and
but it's so true. But so you could take that away and then add, I'm also going to empathize with the experience that you're having.
Right. Right. Okay. So when someone let's just go through your pillars or your categories. So when someone's looking at their past, like what do you suggest they do in understanding and kind of coming to terms with their past and their past parenting? And how do we identify if like a way that we were raised or something we don't want to bring it into our parenting? Like what's an example and how would you coach someone to figure that out?
So I might say like there are 4 parenting styles in the developmental research that basically amount to, one of them is neglectful. And nobody listening to this is a neglectful parent because they wouldn't be listening to a podcast that is centering the conversation around parenting. So we'll just move that along. But then the other three are kind of looked at as one side of it is measuring like how sensitive your parent is to who you are developmentally, what age you are, what's appropriate for your personality, your temperament, just your way, who you are in the world. And the other side of it is how it was, called demandingness, but that's essentially boundaries and expectations. Mm-hmm. And so the middle ground is authoritative, which boils down to highly sensitive with boundaries. What I was saying for me is my North Star, and what is in general most closely linked with the kinds of things that we think of when we think about wanting to raise our kids in a particular way. Now, there are some people that might say, I don't care about social emotional well-being and intellectual growth. And then this may not be the style for them. But then there's authoritarian parenting, which is because I said so. And it's not super sensitive, but it is very clear what the boundaries are. And it's a little bit fear-based. Like, if you don't do it this way, you will get in trouble. And that's it. And there's no reasoning behind it. And I'm not going to think about like, well, okay, you're in 11th grade now. You've been really responsible. I'm going to, give you a little more space to fall, and we'll go from there. And if you do, that means I gave you too much space. We'll pull it back. That's more authoritative. Authoritarian's like, no, I'm not going to trust you. I'm not going to change the rules for each sibling. This is because I said so. And on the other side of that, one extreme are the highly sensitive, permissive parents who don't feel comfortable giving boundaries. And that is often because they weren't given boundaries. And so it feels uncomfortable to watch their child suffer because they were given a boundary, and feel sad because they don't get what they want. So the first thing to do is to think, now obviously people don't really fall into just a bucket of one type, but in general, more often than not, where do you fall when you were parented? Like, where did your parents fall? That's the first question I would ask, so that you could say, my parents were really permissive. And now that I think about it, when I see someone is upset by something I ask of them, I just want to fix it right away. And I just say, never mind, I'm not going to ask that of you. Okay. So I'm going to have trouble with a 3-year-old then, because they really push. And I am, if I'm like, okay, never mind, take whatever you want, I'm going to be very permissive. So if you're conscious about it, then you could say, okay, what in that parenting style worked for me? Well, my parents really saw me and loved me and showed me that. So I'm going to take that. But then I'm going to just add to it clear boundaries, because without them, I'm very anxious. And that is kind of how I would go about it. Anybody listening can just think like, what was my experience? And there's always something that you can hopefully take that you really want to keep. And you don't have to practice that because it's part of who you are. It's home to you. Mm-hmm. But then the parts that you don't want, you have to make
also home to you.
Also home to you. And you have to make a really intense effort to fight the urge to make that home for your kids. So, an example is just like cooking. If you think about it, like, I love overcooked food, overcooked vegetables, overcooked meats, overcooked fish, because frankly, everyone in my family was terrible at cooking and they made really bad overcooked food. Yeah. Except that's home for me. So when I go home and my mom makes that overcooked food, I love it. Yeah. But I have to try very hard to enjoy the taste of food that is cooked properly. Like, I actually am like this, if I'm conscious that I'm saying to a nutritionist steak, but I'm going to.
I love red meat, and everyone listening knows that I think it's super nutrient dense and a great source of protein. So don't even.
Oh, great. Okay. So a beautiful grass-fed piece of steak. Yeah. That is cooked perfectly to other people would taste absolutely disgusting to me. Mm-hmm. Because
you want turkey.
I want a hockey puck. Yeah. Right? And that's the kind of thing where I have to think like, okay, I know that that's not as good for me to have burnt steak. So I just have to like practice having it cooked medium, just medium. I'm not going to, and I just have to work really hard getting used to that taste. And eventually I'm like, oh, that's a way better taste, but it takes a while. And so it seems silly to use that example, but it's the same thing with parenting. What's home to you, whether it's the smells, the foods, or the emotional connection, it's all what's familiar to you. If somebody didn't pay attention to you when you needed to, be comforted, it's going to feel uncomfortable when someone comforts you. And it's going to feel uncomfortable potentially for you to comfort someone. Or you might think, oh, someone's upset. I don't know how to even deal with this. So those are the moments to just notice. There's no judgment whatsoever. It's just like, oh, that makes sense now. Like my home was not a place where anger showed up very much. I get really scared when people get angry. Like anger is actually a very natural part of our day. Mm-hmm. And emotions, I really don't like to think of them as positive or negative. It's more like challenging versus easier. And so if I never experienced challenging and I didn't know how to manage that, I'm going to have to work extra hard to make sure that my child knows you could be angry. How you're expressing that anger is going to have to shift. But I'm not scared of that. I'm not scared of your anger. And that is work we have to do as adults. I'm not sure if that made sense, but there you go.
No, it makes perfect sense. And it, it's going to bring up things for everyone listening. It definitely is bringing up things for me. I mean, like I had free reign of the pantry whenever I wanted it, whenever, from Costco, all the snacks, where I might have been like, there might have been things that were strict in certain ways, but like I could help myself to a whole plate of Triscuits, Sweet Thins, Bagel Bites, like frosted animal cookies, you name it, without any boundaries around when, even if it was 10 minutes before dinner, Mm-hmm. And so for me, it's like being a nutritionist and knowing like how cavities develop, how hunger hormones work, like blood sugar balance. Like it feels uncomfortable to me even to give boundaries because I was loved through food and I was allowed to love myself through food. And so even just thinking about wanting mealtime to be a time where my children sit to the table and are actually hungry, having boundaries, an hour and a half before that mealtime, before dinner, and saying like, hey, Bash, I know we just had snack time, bud. Like we can't have snacks right now because mom's in the kitchen, like making dinner and it'll be ready soon. I promise. And you're going to love it. But like, we can't eat right now. And having him get uncomfortable about that or upset with me and maybe even slightly throw a tantrum. There have been times when I'm like, fine, here are some olives, like, but tomorrow. And like, there are occasional times when I will obviously, like, I don't want my child to starve and
I think you have a gauge.
Scarcity here, but like, there are times when I'm like, yeah, maybe he did undereat lunch and he didn't really eat the snack. He was on his bike or, I wasn't there. So I don't know, and Chris isn't able to tell me, or the person who was babysitting is gone. Like, did he eat? Did he not eat? And we'll have that conversation. But like, I do care so much that they're eating the nourishing foods that I'm putting on the plate. But I know it's uncomfortable for me to parent that way because it was literally not something.
It just wasn't part of what you knew.
It wasn't. And like that, like autonomy as a child of like, what am I going to put together on this paper plate from the pantry? Like, it's just funny things from your childhood. But even just, I can think about like with Chris and I, like, sometimes he will avoid like big feelings and try to like move right through them. Someone's upset and he's like, let's keep going. And I'm like,
right.
Wait, stop. Like, he's upset. We need to talk about why he's upset. He wants to tell you why he's upset. And sometimes Chris will try and wrap it up. And he's like, Dad, I'm still talking. And Bash will like actually say that at 3.5, which is really sweet. Cause I think he's really like talked enough to know that he has power. But yeah, so I'm sure things are coming up for other people too, where these things feel uncomfortable. But I want to not talk. I want you to talk. But I'm so excited because I love this stuff. You talk about editing behaviors and boundaries. So can we talk about how to edit behaviors and set boundaries with our kids? Like what does that really look like? And what's a healthy amount versus like,
control?
Hi, I'm literally telling you what to do 24/7 as a toddler.
Right. No,
I think sure this way. Like, I don't know.
Totally. And I think that that's really hard too. And it goes back to, okay, what, if if nobody showed you what boundaries were, you could swing the other direction and just be so controlling because you're like, I didn't have any, or I had all the control as a kid. My parents were so permissive. I'm going to let the pendulum full swing the other way. And I'm just going to control and micromanage everything. So that's a risk too. So again, it goes back to like, okay, what am I comfortable with? I'm comfortable with, and I think setting boundaries is always easier when you think, what does my child need? What's appropriate, not want, but need, and what's appropriate? And is this something that is flexible for me? Because you really want, if you want a kid to be autonomous, you need to sort of give them the space to fail. So you don't want to give so many boundaries that they can't, that it's too rigid, but you don't want to give so few boundaries that they drown. So I guess the place to look at first is never do for your child what they can already do for themselves. So if you find that you're controlling their outfits when they have the capacity to try on their own, pick their own clothes out, let go. If you feel like you're feeding them, but they know how to lift up a fork, stop and say, I know you don't want to feed yourself because you love, like let's say some kids are like, no, feed me and full bottle and put me in the stroller when I can walk. Some of them might rebel against that, but others are like, no, I would love this. It's very luxurious. And so that's where you say like, can they do it for themselves? Yes. Okay. They need to do it for themselves. Can they almost do it for themselves? Yes. Okay. Then I'm going to help them. I'm going to guide them. I'm going to do a little bit, and then I'm going to see where they go from there. And if they can't do it for themselves at all, you can teach them, but you do it. And so that's kind of how you figure out what the rules of the game are in your household. And then if it's like, okay, it's not about putting clothes on, tying shoes, eating, sleeping, whatever. It's really about how they're treating another person or something. Then it's like deciding for yourself, you can't control how they feel. It goes back to that. Like, you don't have to love your brother. You have to respect and treat your brother, or rather you have to treat your brother with respect, or you have to treat your brother with your hands by your side, or you have to use words instead of physical violence, but you don't have to love. I mean, of course, hopefully they will love each other, these siblings, but it's about boundaries when you're trying to control feelings versus behaviors is the number one thing to catch yourself on. Like if you ever trying to say, you should feel grateful right now, for example, that's like,
Okay.
No, that's not something in your control. How your child feels has nothing to do. It's none of your business in that way. So that's one way to say, okay, I'm not going to be over controlling because I'm not going to try to control feelings. And then if you're thinking I'm containing behavior, okay. So think of it as I am going to allow my child to do the things that they can do for themselves. I'm not controlling that. But the minute that they can't, meaning they don't have the self-control to turn the television off when they're supposed to, I have to do it for them. So those are the kinds of things that you can think about is no trying to control feelings. And then you're not going to be an overbearing, controlling parent. You can't be. There's too much invested in when there's like a mix of feelings and behaviors, where once you pull out the trying to control the feelings, you're not going to have as much to say.
Okay.
So like if a kid is tantruming, the over controlling moment would be, you're not allowed to tantrum. But the boundary is we have to leave this party because we can't ruin everybody else's time. So you could still have these feelings, but we'll leave. I'm trying to think of other like less intense examples. I'm going to put certain foods on the table and you can figure out how much to have. So you're not, so it's all about balancing, understanding where your child is developmentally, wanting to make sure that you're backing off trying to think about how to control what's inside their head and you're focused on what their outer behavior is. But if that outer behavior is something that they have are old enough to manage, like, again, getting themselves dressed is part of, I'm calling it behavior, but it's like part of that category of things where you're like, I'm wiping their mouth, I'm putting on their pants, but they can do it. You're being too controlling. So all of those things should help guide you. And you just check in with yourself. Like, if you're overcorrecting, like they're drawing something and you're fixing it, that's controlling. Like, let them make a messy, what's called a beautiful oops. There was a really cute book, Beautiful Oops. But it's like, we have to get comfortable that they're not going to get it perfect. And we can sit with how we feel uncomfortable, that like there's going to be some messiness involved. And
like,
I think
the Duplo tower is going to fall if you don't stabilize it with this exact behavior.
Exactly. And so if you're like, well, how are they going to learn how that, and it's safe, right? Like, you're not going to say you're going to get run over if you let a kid run through the street before they're ready to control their behavior. Well, that's not a boundary you can be flexible about, because you don't get a second chance. The Duplo tower can fall, and the worst case scenario is that your kid's going to cry because they're bummed it fell. But then you could say, I wonder why it fell. Let's figure it out together.
I mean, that's the kind of verbiage where you're like, I want to be like, it's okay, it was great. And then I'm like, am I praising my child? I'm not making the situation better, but my innate reaction, which I'm trying to change, is like, it was so great, bud. You're doing so good. Like, it's okay. And he doesn't want to have anything to do with that. He's still upset. His tower fell over. And I'm like, I'm doing that all wrong.
No, it's your instinct is to soothe both you and your child, which makes total sense. And soothing is so important. It's just, we tend to over-soothe to make ourselves feel less uncomfortable. And so in the case of a falling tower, I mean, I think it's a little bit like, I don't know if this metaphor makes sense, but like, if you think of triage, if you have a broken nail and you go to the emergency room, you really don't need to get a CAT scan and MRI and blood work done. Like, you could just have a Band-Aid and scurry out the door and everything's going to be fine. And I think parenting today, we take micro moments and make them so important. And we're like, okay, did I honor their feelings? Did I set the boundary correctly? Did I force them to do too much? Was I praising them for their process, not their outcomes? Like, there's a lot of noise in your head. And so I would say also in those moments, I hope nobody's too hard on themselves. Like, yeah, you might say like, it's okay, buddy. And sure, it'd be great if you said, that stinks when things fall. You didn't like that. Let's figure out together what we can do next time. But I mean, if you say, but you also built it and it was really high and it didn't last long, so we could figure that out later. But look at how much you did do. That's okay. That's also an approach to noticing the good in the world. And I just don't think those micro moments, I think the weight of the world is on parents' shoulders right now to make each one of those micro moments teachable. And I want them to be more like paper cuts, so that they're not we don't take them too seriously. And like, I guess it's more thinking, if most of the time I'm paying attention with good intentions and naming the feelings and then setting the boundary, and some of the time I'm just like, just go do it. Yeah. Or overpraising, when we've talked about like, this is another conversation, but the complexity of praise and blah, blah, it's not the end of the world and your child's going to be totally fine. It's kind of thinking, which is hard, that you need a B-. Like, your parenting needs like a B-. Everything else is like extra credit and not actually serving anybody. If you got all those micro moments right, your kids couldn't function in the world, because micro moments go wrong all the time. So in those moments when you, Kelly, are thinking about, did I do that right? I think you're hurting yourself more by putting that weight, that pressure on yourself. But at the same time, it's so wonderful to pay attention. So if you could do it with less judgment, not saying you're judging yourself, but on the off chance you're like all of us.
Yeah, no, I do feel, well, and that's kind of takes me back where I'm like, I guess I turned out okay. I think, like, I'm like, my parents didn't have access to all of this. Like, I'm sure there were like parenting books, but parenting science has come so far, and like attachment, secure attachment, and all the science around secure attachment and everything. Like, I'm going to be 40 in 2 years. Like, that's been in my lifetime, And so my parents, all I'm saying is like, I know what you mean by a B minus, like without any information and just doing it the way, I guess, intuitive parenting, like however you would parent if you didn't know how to parent your child, just out of the pure love of like, you had this child and how can you just like have this amazing connection and love with them? Like, how do you show up for them? Like, without all this, I think a lot of the people listening, if not everyone, would be like B plus parenting or even B parenting, And so your resources and these resources help us, but they make a lot of us go like, was that right? Was that like, how would I know? Cause we just want to show up for our kids. Yeah. Like, that's the whole reason why I was so excited to have you on the podcast, because this is not my science specialty. And I am just, I think the modeling and exposure is easy for me because I just like playing with my kids and I like getting in the kitchen with me and like having fun and stuff. It's definitely like the overpraising and how I'm communicating boundaries that I'm working on. Because I guess in looking back in my life, it was just like, just because you got to come home at 10 because I said so. Like, that's your curfew. And it was just like, okay, it's my curfew. I'm mad about it, but that's my curfew. So, but I was always told like, you're doing such a great job. We love you so much. We're so proud of you. But I do know as an adult, I'm like, still like, hey, Dad, guess what?
Right. You still want that approval. I know.
Totally.
That's the problem is, especially when you're like thinking about perfectionism, this beautiful, well-meaning generation of people who were raised being told. Now, that doesn't mean everybody listening, because not everybody had parents who were like, you're the most amazing thing in the world and everything you did is amazing. But I certainly had those parents, and it sounds like you had those parents. Like, yes, they had their strict boundaries, but they were like, that's beautiful, or this is wonderful. And so of course you're wired to want to get their approval. Like, there's nothing, and it was also well-meaning. And sometimes it can get too extreme. Like, I know I was so careful. I'm like, I am not going to say a thing about how my daughters look, how they like their bodies look. There's just nothing. I'm not going to talk about they're just smart. I'm just going to talk about process, and I'm going to lay off of praise completely. But at a certain point, my daughter, who's 15 now, is like, it's not the worst thing if you said, that looks very beautiful, darling. Like, you're so gorgeous. Because I was fixated on the piece of research that tells us that when you praise a child for something not in their control, meaning their looks or their smarts, that it isn't a favor. It actually makes them think they could be found out as a fraud. So they don't want to step outside of whatever it was you were praising. So you got praised for being good in English. I'm not going to try math. What if people find out that I'm actually not that smart? You get praised for being a genius. You don't even want to take academic or job risks because you're like, okay, I seem to have pulled the wool over everyone's eyes. So I'm just going to keep right here in this little box, and I'm not going to go outside of it because I don't want to stop getting that praise. Or what if you're not beautiful? What if you started off beautiful and you kind of didn't stay beautiful, and your parents, all of a sudden you feel like, do they still love me as much? Because they told me when I was little, I was the most beautiful girl in the world, and nobody's saying that to me anymore. So there's a lot of heaviness involved in the beautiful praise that we give our kids. And there's a lot of a sense of like, we don't want our kids to feel like our love rests on, my advisor once said this and it knocked me over, and I didn't have kids at the time, but she said, we never want our kids to think that our love rests on the splendor of their accomplishments. And it was so important because we have such a tendency to want to say like, you're amazing. Look at this A, look at this, look at this accomplishment. And at the same time, if that's something that's important to a child, you want to see them. You want to be able to say, I noticed that you worked really hard, and I'm so excited for you that you accomplish that. Like, but for you, because I know how it feels for you. And I think that's the nuance there, but it's hard because to my mind, and it's my whole field is confusing in that way. Everything is about balance because you can't never praise your kids, but you can't always praise your kids. I remember my mom saying that she clapped for me so much that when she dropped me off at preschool, every time I did anything, the teacher said that I would just look around waiting for people to clap. That is so sad, So but she was well-meaning, loving, like she just didn't know that maybe that might send a message that nothing was of value if it didn't get that clap and happy. But on the other side of it, what about those kids that have nobody clapping for them? That sucks. So it's just, you do want, every kid needs one grown-up to light up when they walk into a room. So it is just balance, but it's exhausting in our heads to know, was I balanced? Did I give the right boundaries and the right sensitivity? Was there enough praise, but not so much? Was it process, not outcome? I mean, there's a lot of that. And so if you can just be aware, like today, you might just be aware, oh, I am praising a lot and clapping a lot. Maybe I will just dial it back 10%. That's all. But you'll still do it because you're never going to stop doing it because that's part of your relationship. So I think that's the key, is just have an awareness and decide to balance the responses that you give your kids so that none of it is so extreme. Because of course, parenting shifts with the wind in the culture, not actually in the research. Even if you look 40 years ago, in the scientific literature, they didn't have like brain scans to check this out, but they had theorists, and the theorists kind of said the same thing that we say today with a little bit of variation, but that's not necessarily what the culture said. So it's not so much that there's like a parenting revolution right now. I think it's just it's a louder conversation.
Right. Well, I'm hopeful when I think about it. Like I think about my dad's parents that maybe were like, having cocktails at 5 or 6 o'clock with their friends. And then my dad and his siblings were just kind of like everywhere taking care of themselves. And like my dad told me he signed himself up for baseball, like walked down and signed himself up for baseball. And so then I look at like my parents who did the complete opposite. Were like at every single soccer game, like team mom, coach, like sitting on the sideline, clapping, great job. And I think our generation's swinging back to like, so I'm hopeful that it's just that we're kind of just slowing that pendulum all down to be in the flow of like balance in the middle somewhere.
Yes, I think that would be so dreamy if we get there. In fact, you were saying that about sports. I was just saying to someone, my daughter is on the volleyball team and they have all these games that kind of don't get announced until a couple days before, and the time sometimes and location don't get announced in advance. And I'm just like, how can a working parent show up? And so I'm like, here, I've just decided I'm going to go to 4 games this month. I can't go to all the games. I'm not going to go to none of the games because I can make my schedule work enough that I can go to some of the games. But I have to work hard not to feel guilty about that, even though I know in my bones that there is no scientific literature that says that the parent who shows up to all the games has the kid who does better in life. And if anything, to your point, like your father having the autonomy to walk over and sign up for baseball, if he can, it goes back to if your child can do for themselves what, like let them do it. It's just if they can't do it, that you want to be there for them. So it's some kind of balance. And if the pendulum is going wild and going to finally meet somewhere in the middle, that would be so wonderful.
Well, I think with all of this information all online and for people to have access to podcasts like yours, like Instagram videos, things that, where the science is being distilled down for people, it can be helpful. Again, it can make us like overanalyze our regular behaviors. But ultimately, I mean, we're hoping that our children are independent and resilient, and their self-talk to themselves is kind. And, so my dad, yeah, signing himself up for baseball, I think about how resilient my dad is, how independent he is. He's an entrepreneur because of it. Like he's pulled himself up by his bootstraps a million times in business and otherwise. And so, yeah, I mean, like there's some major silver lining to that childhood that may have been really detrimental to someone else, you know?
And that's such a good point too. Like what is the context? Like you said in the very beginning. So for some kids, that was too much independence. For your dad, it was not.
Right. So can we get into a little bit of the independence and resilience building in children and how we can best do that with our kids?
Sure. Is it better to use concrete examples like from your day-to-day life, or do you want to talk more big picture?
We can use examples from my life. I mean, Sebastian's at an age where he is 3.5. He goes upstairs and puts his clothes on, like he picks his outfit, and he is a shorts and short sleeve t-shirt guy, like 364 days of the year. It is a little bit of a struggle with like if he needs to be wearing pants or a sweater or a jacket. But I'm of the mindset of like, okay, cool. You want to be in shorts and a t-shirt? Let's go outside. And then if he's like, Mom, I'm cold. And then I hand him a sweatshirt. The problem is he's a little bit warm-blooded. And Chris is like, he's going to get sick. And then one time he did get sick and Chris was pretty much, I mean, he thought it was because I let him go outside in shorts and a t-shirt. But for the most part, he's like, I have a drawer for snacks that's like at his level. He can push his kitchen tower over if it is around, if it's snack time and he says, I'm hungry. I'm like, okay, well, there's the fruit bowls out and your drawer is open with olives and beef sticks and like seaweed snacks and all those things. Like he is pretty independent, which I love, but you gave me an idea because he watches cartoons on Sundays and we know it's a struggle or weekends or whatever. And I'll be like, all right, last one, bud. Curious storage is almost over. Last one, bud. And I give him like 3 little like, hey, remember I just said this is your last one. And then I will go to the TV with the clicker because I'm like, here comes the meltdown.
Yeah.
But now I'm going to give it to him because he loves power. So
I'm going to have the power to turn it off.
Here's the clicker. When this one's over and you see those words, the credits, like I'm going to make him do it this weekend.
Yeah. And then if he can't, he's not ready, then you could say, it seems like that was too much freedom. We'll try again next time. I'll turn it off this time.
I love it. I'm totally taking that one with me. So, I mean, he is pretty independent. I think really, I don't know. I mean, I feel like he's independent. Maybe it's like boundaries that are a little bit tough. Like, hey, we're going to leave now. It's time to go inside for dinner. And we're outside in the cul-de-sac, which we do that around like 5 to 6 o'clock, 4:30 to 6 o'clock. They're like riding bikes and scooters. And it's really hard because we have neighborhood kids. Like we give the boundary. We say like in 10 minutes, in 5 minutes, do we need to set an alarm? We set a 3-minute alarm. The alarm, he hears it. We're like, okay. And sometimes he'll run from us. And then we're like, oh, it looks like you're having a hard time coming in. Mom's going to pick you up now. We're going to walk inside. Yeah. And recently there's been, and I think it's because like preschool or seeing other kids do it. There's been some like, I'm going to hit your body now while you're holding me on my hip. And I'm like, trying to think about all the therapists that I follow online. I'm like, I will not let you hit me. I'm going to hold your body so you don't hit me. Here we go. But it's all of those things at this age where you're like, I don't want him to be a bully. I never want him to hit. Like, I know that this is in him to want to do that. I don't know. So
no, but you're doing exactly like, that's what you do. You stop their body because you can't let them do it. You can say, I know you're doing it. I know why you're doing it. And later you could talk about it when their brain, when his brain isn't in a red zone of just like that, what I'm sure you probably talked about with regard to food, but a stress response. Mm-hmm. And so if his brain is thinking like fight, flight, or freeze, he's not going to hear if you're like, I know you really don't want to go inside. Yeah. I'm so sorry. This is such a hard thing to have to do when you don't, he just is like,
bye, Mom.
I'm out. Like
peace.
Lights out.
Across a cul-de-sac.
Exactly. And so then you really don't have a choice but to say, I'm going to take your body. I won't let you hit. And then when we go inside, then once the tantrum is over, the disappointment is over and life is peaceful again, then you could say that was really hard for you to go inside after, all that fun in the cul-de-sac. I wonder if there's something that we can do knowing that this happens every day to make it a little bit easier on you. And maybe you come up with some fun ideas. If not, it's just going to be one of those things where it's like, all right, we'll just do that thing where I grab your body and I make sure you don't, do anything to hurt my body. And that's it. And usually, like, because you're consistent and because you're not letting that moment make the cul-de-sac time, which by the way sounds so fun, make that cul-de-sac time last longer, then it stops being a challenge after, it's just like, what's the point of pushing back? My mom's not moving anywhere. Yeah. But you could also say in the summer, we can change the time and you can get an extra 15 minutes. How does that sound? But if we do the extra 15 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever, then if it's too hard for you, we'll have to make it earlier. So it's like you're giving him freedom to make his own choice to get more time or not, or to turn the TV off or to have you turn it off.
That's a great a piece of advice. I think I have a follow-up question. If I'm someone who really likes my kids to be happy, and I think this is what my parents did have strong boundaries on certain things, but a lot of times they did want us to be, my sisters and I, like, happy. You're like, he's so bummed that we're leaving the cul-de-sac. Okay, I'm going to give him an extra 5 minutes and get him an extra 5 minutes. I don't want to be rewarding a tantrum or a meltdown. It feels like when he's upset about a boundary and then he's crying, or either of them are crying, and then I'm sad that they're sad. And so then I want to, like, elongate the time, or I want to, like, change the boundary. And it feels like I am reinforcing the tantrum behavior where he's like, ooh, this crying thing is working. And then I'm noticing then in our regular everyday life that I'm having mom guilt because I'm working more. So then when he's upset, I feel more uncomfortable. And so then I'm softening my boundaries more and more. And so now his behavior is dictating. He knows that this behavior is getting him what he wants. And then I'm no longer the parent, but really just his meltdowns are dictating what's happening.
Right. Which is so, like, the story of everyone, for whatever that's worth. And I think it got so much more intense for parents during the pandemic, because for parents who had maybe a little bit older kids, it was like, I feel so guilty that you have to experience such a limited lifestyle, that any social interaction that you do have, I'm just letting all bets are off, do whatever. But the problem is that without leadership and boundaries, it can make anybody feel anxious. I mean, we see that with adults too. So in moments when you're like, I'm uncomfortable with how I want my kid to be happy in this moment, that's just a time to remind yourself, happiness in one moment actually is not associated with long-term happiness. And having confused boundaries is definitely not associated with long-term happiness. So I just have to that's just about finding ways. And by the way, I feel the same way. And my kids are older, but I still I'm gutted by when they're not, like, when they're sad. It's so hard to watch. Even if I know that the reason they're sad is because they want to be doing something that's not good for them and I shouldn't be giving it to them. But I think the thing that you want to tell yourself is, this is a marathon, not a race. And if we sprint right now in this happy place, there's going to be burnout. And so the discomfort, the getting, like, small, it's a little bit resilience building, because you're getting, like, small moments of uncomfortable pushback, and you're building your own mom resilience, because you're learning, and he still survived and was giggling 15 minutes later and life is happy. It was a moment. And just, like, getting that comfort, like, if we're not comfortable with the idea that feelings come and feelings go, that they're just temporary, there's no way that a toddler is getting comfortable with it, because they don't have the brain capacity to know that what they feel right this second isn't how they're going to feel forever. We know that. Like, we actually know that, and it's still hard. Like, what you said is true it's such a universal feeling. Like, you don't want your child to experience that challenging feeling. But that's because we are, as adults, forget it's 15 minutes, probably 15 seconds. It's not going to be their life. And if you don't get comfortable, I mean, I think it's also remembering when you want to build resilience, if you never experienced pushback and discomfort, it is traumatizing to get to high school and experience discomfort, like when your parents can't fix it for you. And so if you've never experienced those small moments of uncomfortable, you can have really high rates of the opposite of happy. So that's not to scare anybody into being more comfortable with those boundaries. It's more just to say you're giving a gift with those small moments that you know your child can handle because it's in a safe setting. I'm not talking about like sending him out to like a nasty person who's not taking good care of him and who's making him miserable, but it's really like, I know he's safe.
Yeah.
I know he's safe. And I know big picture for the majority of the time, this is a happy kid. This is a challenging feeling. And this challenging feeling is going to build that muscle that doesn't get a lot of like that muscle doesn't get a workout all the time. The happy muscle gets a big workout, but we need all of our muscles to be able to thrive in any, you just don't want it to be too much. Like you don't want to grow the horrible feelings because having too many challenging feelings it becomes chronic. Like the problem with stress isn't minor moments that go up and then down again. It's chronic stress.
Right.
And challenging feelings cause stress. And so all you need to know is if they're temporary, that it's no big deal. And then you could look at the, just to motivate you. And when I say you, I just mean us, all of us.
No.
But if you look at the research on toxic stress, people hear toxic stress and they go and throw it around like it's toxic to take your child out of a fun setting and bring them inside the house. Yeah. But that toxic stress is very specifically stressors that become chronic. So like the duration is just lasting too long and there's no loving support system. Once you have a loving support system, terrible things can happen, but it moves actually into what's called tolerable stress. Tolerable stress builds resilience. And then there's positive stress. Positive stress is what you're talking about. Like, I have so many friends that I want to play with, but I am sad that I have to go inside and have dinner with my loving family. Like that's actually, you want your kids to experience that many times over their early childhood so that, because it's in the context of love and support, so that they're not unfamiliar with those feelings. They just don't get them in like big doses chronically, and it doesn't mess with them. So big dose, chronic, bad. No loving parent to support you, bad.
Right.
Not good for kids. Horrible, lifetime negative effects associated with adult obesity, heart disease, cancer, depression, every mental illness. Like it's no good. But it is not to be confused with positive stress. That's what you're talking about, which is, or just things like not getting a part in the play or not remembering to bring your homework in and having your parents bring it for you because they don't want you to feel like you're in trouble. Like we don't need all that should go in the bucket of positive stressors that are part of how we inoculate kids so that they have tiny little bits of that virus so that they can tolerate exposure.
Real life. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I will say it does motivate me knowing that it's building my mom resilience. And I do see it kind of like exactly how you say, if I am continually letting my boundaries go, I keep doing that. And also like the meltdown seems longer. The stress of the situation is longer versus like, this is it. This is the boundary. My kid knows it's the boundary. All of those, like his reaction to it goes down. He has the positive stress of like having to like leave his friends, but the whole interaction is easier because he knows like, this is my boundary and I stick to it. And even though it's a bummer, like, let's all go inside. And it's funny because in parenting, it feels like you get really resilient at a certain stage in life. And then you're like, wait, we were just 18 months and this was so, we had figured it out. And now you're 2,
like here it is
again. And now we're dealing with this whole other thing where I have to constantly remind myself as a parent, like, get back to your harder boundaries, like have a backbone, and then they listen so much faster and easier. And I guess what I would consider like a longer drawn out process of stress and tantrum or whatever is shorter. They're still bummed. I'm thinking, okay, great, positive stress.
And you're acknowledging it. You're not like, sucks to be you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I think, I think about that mom resilience. Like, we're born when our kids are born as parents. Like, it's not like, oh, I'm however old I was when I had my first kid. I'm now, all that wisdom is there. No, you just also, like, your baby and you have been in this relationship together for exactly 3+ years. So of course you're growing your skills in the process. I'm growing mine in the process. We're works in progress, and it's building our resilience. And part of our resilience is that we can move with ease through their difficult feelings. And then that gift is like life-changing, because you look to your parents to figure out if you're supposed to be okay. And if you aren't panicked that your child's having a challenging feeling, but you're available to like be loving support, not because you think they can't handle it, but just because you love them. There's so much value in that. Like, it seems so small, but that moment when your baby is like 9 months old and they're crawling and they aren't sure if they should touch something that might be dangerous, so they look at you, that's a forever phenomenon. It's just like, you look to the person that you trust and love to give you feedback. And if they see that you're like, I know you're scared right now, but I know you can do this. You can cross that finish line. You can, I can't think of anything risky that a baby does that's safe. So we'll move on to older kids. But like, you can crawl on that table.
Yeah.
It is such a beautiful gift, because the other side of it is that your nervous system as a mother is panicked that your child is experiencing distress, and they co-regulate with you. So they're catching if you were playing ball and the ball was your emotions, you keep throwing them a ball that's as stressed as the ball they already were carrying, versus if you keep breathing, like physically just take deep breaths in the experience of their distress, they're going to borrow that you understand it's going to be a tough moment and then it's going to pass. And it really is so healthy. It's just like when a friend of yours, if like your friend comes to you and they're devastated about, like, they broke up with their boyfriend, and they're so sad, they're crying, they tell you this horrible story. If you just sit there sobbing with them, I don't know why I chose that. Like, in high school. We're in high school. But if you're
sobbing with you
and you're sobbing with them, then like that person doesn't feel better. They're like, wait, is it as bad? Is it that bad? They also don't feel better if you're like, this too shall pass. There's a space between, which is you connect with empathy. Like, I feel how you feel. I get it. Okay, now I'm going to take a deep breath and remember I'm not you. So I can pull back and help you and say, I can see with bird's eye perspective, this is so hard for you. How may I be of service? Because I know you can get out of this, but I am here for you. That's compassion. And that is like how kids thrive.
Mic drop. Mic drop.
I'm going to go tell my kids, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, I know. Well, it's like having these conversations and having these reminders and, ditching the guilt and having the boundaries so that they feel safe, and just instead like refocusing that energy on something like exciting or fun that you can do together, and remembering that that all of these things are positive stress. The Duplo Tower falling down, coming in from the cul-de-sac, like not getting what we want, like it is actually what's opening the door to communication with our kids, instead of just being like, everything is great.
Yeah.
Throw you into high school and hope you survive. Good luck, buddy.
Yeah. Don't be upset. That dance. I know this is a podcast, but there was a very cute dance there.
Oh, well, it's just a good reminder for moms and dads, that
all caregivers.
we can hold the space and it's positive stress. And all I want my kids to be is like independent and resilient. And I do want them to be happy, but I have to remember that the negative feelings that they're feeling will pass. And I need to remind them that. So, thank you so much for being here, for having just such a easygoing, candid conversation with me, helping me with my kids. Hopefully people listening got something out of this and it wasn't just about me. But
we all are in this very similar boats, even though everybody comes from different contexts. I think we just want our kids to do okay and thrive.
Right. Well, where can people follow along? Where can they find your podcast?
Thank you. Raising Good Humans podcast, wherever you get podcasts. And I'm on Instagram at Raising Good Humans podcast. Very creative. Just everything under that.
Thank you so much for being here. I will put everything in the show notes and we'll see you soon.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to Be Well by Kelly. Please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Learn more at bewellbykelly.com and follow me on Instagram at bewellbykelly. I would love if you picked up my books, Body Love and Body Love Every Day. They're sold on Amazon and at all major booksellers.